I call Phil Twyford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's 10 minutes we'll never get back. You've got to love David Bennett. You've got to love David.
Order. I wonder if I can encourage the member's own colleagues not to banter, bicker and barrage while he's making his speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite right. Quite right. You've got to love David Bennett. He's always good for a laugh. He's always good for a laugh. And it's great to see a member of the National Party who is so proud of his own government's policies that he spent, I don't know, 10% of his speech talking about them. Mr. Speaker, there is an approach to the housing crisis that is illustrated by this bill. It goes something like this. We've got a problem. They're generally reluctant to admit it's a crisis, although Alistair Scott did last night in the House. But there's a recognition that there's at least a problem, a crisis, that something needs to be done about it. So let's do something. In fact, let's do anything. Let's do anything, no matter how small and inconsequential it might be. And this policy, sir, is exactly that. It's what I call a Nick Smith special. It was announced in the heat of the election campaign, with the government very sensitive that it was bleeding support on the housing issue. And I say it's a Nick Smith special because it was announced with great fanfare. It will be almost completely inconsequential, and actually it risks making matters worse. But never mind, its purpose is simply to convey the impression to the public that something is being done about the housing crisis. That is its sole purpose. So, sir, what does this bill do? The bill enables people to withdraw the government contribution, often referred to as the member tax credits, from their Kiwisaver account in order to get a deposit together to take advantage of the Welcome Home Loan and the Homestart subsidies. So it's part of a broader policy package that will kick in on April the 1st that does three main things. It increases the taxpayer subsidies available for the Welcome Home Loan. It lifts the house price caps, thereby making more people eligible, and it allows people to crack open the government contribution in their Kiwisaver scheme. Now, anyone listening to this debate, sir, will know by now that Labor is voting for this bill, but they will have noticed that we're highly critical of it, and I want to explain why. The reason that we're voting for it is that it is better than nothing, but not by very much. It's benign at best, and a number of contributors in the earlier stages of this debate have made the point, sir, that it falls woefully short of what is actually needed to make a difference to the housing crisis. It's completely inadequate to the scale of the problem that we have. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that, sir. The second thing is that it risks making housing, particularly in the growth markets in Auckland and the Upper North Island, even more unaffordable than it already is. So let's talk about the scale of the alleged benefit of this policy up against the scale of the problem. This bill could benefit a first home buyer by a maximum of $521 a year. That's the maximum amount of the member tax credit, the government tax credit, $521 a year. How much is that a week? About $10 a week, right? $10 a week. $10 a week. Now, how much are house prices? How much are house prices going up across New Zealand on average? $1,000 a week. All right, 100 times more. That's just house price inflation, right? In Auckland, yes, house prices are going up $1,000 a week on average across New Zealand, because in Auckland, it's $1,700 a week, right? On average across New Zealand, even in the members' electorate, the average across the whole country is $1,000 a week, right? That's 100 times more than the benefit to first home buyers of this pathetic bill that the government has brought to the House. And if you live in Auckland, the benefit, the house price inflation is 170 times more than the benefit that a first home buyer would get from this bill. So it's completely out of whack. House prices are out of control, particularly in Auckland, but also in Christchurch. And people simply can't save enough to keep up with house price inflation. So this scheme, which is Nick Smith tinkering at its worst, is completely inconsequential compared to the scale of the problem. But the really bankrupt thing about this policy is that it actually risks making things worse, sir. And I want to read into Hansard some of the advice from Treasury about the effects of this policy. In fact, NBR, who we've quoted a lot in the House today, reported when the policy was announced that Treasury had damned this policy as counterproductive. And when it was announced, Prime Minister John Key said, helping more people buy their own home will provide stabilities for families, strength for communities and security in retirement. But Treasury said, those claims do not stack up. That's a direct quote from the government's chief financial advisor. This policy doesn't stack up. And they made 6 main points about the expansion of subsidies under this policy. First, it's likely to simply bring forward purchases that would otherwise happen anyway. Second, the case for government encouraging home ownership over renting is relatively weak. Third, it's not well targeted to households who need it most. Fourth, increasing demand in a supply-constrained environment will simply increase prices, undoing much of the benefit of the subsidy. It's not been tested against other competing ways to spend the money. And sixth, it's not consistent with the government's own social housing and financial assistance policies, which focus on targeting those most in need. That is a damning indictment of this policy by Treasury. And the Reserve Bank in MB had similarly critical things to say, as well as almost every commentator in town said that this policy risks, as David Clark said, pouring petrol on the fire, increasing demand in a supply-constrained market, and actually making housing affordability worse. Sir, it's obvious to any observer that the housing crisis is a crisis of excess demand and inadequate supply. So logic would dictate that the solution lies in either or both subduing demand or increasing supply. This government refuses to do anything about demand. They refuse to tax speculators. They refuse to do anything about offshore speculators driving up property prices. And they've been completely a failure at increasing supply. Now, the special housing areas, which is Nick Smith's other great crowning glory, has produced, you could count the number of new houses that people are living in that have been built in the special housing areas in the last 18 months on 2 hands. It has been a complete and utter failure, and actually it's driven up house prices because many of the developers and the land bankers are sitting on land in those special housing areas, watching the prices go up and not building. The national government is currently presiding over a build rate in Auckland that is 40% less than Labor was doing in 2003. 40% less. And in Auckland, which needs 13,000 houses just to keep up with inflation, National is only delivering about 7,500, a little over half what's needed just to keep up with inflation. Not to mention the fact that the Reserve Bank has said Auckland has a deficit of 15,000 to 20,000 houses that the national government's policies, even if they meet their targets, won't even touch. 15,000 to 20,000 houses, that's the shortage in Auckland, built up under this government's watch, and that is one of the main drivers of the exponential house prices. This policy is a classic Nick Smith special. It's just like the last budget announcement where they took the anti-dumping duties off nails and varnish, claiming it would save home buyers $3,500. Their own officials have said it will save less than a third of that. Again, a pathetic piece of window dressing designed to create the impression that the government is actually doing something about the problem. Instead of setting minimum standards to keep rental properties warm and dry, Nick Smith and Paula Bennett have got a pilot scheme of state houses. That's not where the problem is. The problem is in the private rental market, but they refuse to do anything about it. Sir, the people of New Zealand deserve much better than this small, inconsequential and irrelevant policy.
I call Jamie.